It was a cold Friday morning on September 28th, 2015, when a farmer and his friend were working to put in a water drain system in their field and noticed something odd. They had no idea they were about to find something amazing. Morning time is usually great for doing tough jobs. The air is cool and clean, and you have lots of energy left. So, on this important Friday in 2015, James Brissell thought it was time to finally work on one of his bean fields. He'd been wanting to do this work for a while, and that morning, two of his buddies came by to help. Around 7:30 that morning, they met at James's place and walked out to the field with their digging machine. They were making jokes and having fun on their way, already thinking about how good it would feel to rest when the drain work was done. But they didn't know their day was about to completely change. None of them could have guessed they were going to find something so weird it would end up at the University of Michigan. As soon as they got to the field, they started digging the ditch for the drain pipe. About 20 minutes later, at 8 feet down, James hit something hard with the digging machine. The machine made a loud noise and pushed against whatever was buried way down there. He stopped and yelled for Trent to come look. "Hey, Trent, there's something here. Come see this," he called out. The two men came together and started brushing away the dirt where James had hit the strange thing. It was hard to see through all the mud, but they could tell right away this thing was huge. At first, they thought it might be buried wood, maybe an old fence post that had gotten twisted. "We didn't know what it was, but we knew it was way bigger than a cow bone," Brissell said later, his voice still full of amazement at what happened. But in just a few minutes, they found out they were totally wrong. Soon, they dug up a giant bone, 3 feet long and like nothing they'd ever seen before. At first, it was still covered in dirt, so they weren't sure what it was. But after they cleaned it off a bit, they could see it was a rib bone, and it was massive. James just stood there amazed, trying to understand that something this big had been buried under his field the whole time. After a few moments, the shock started to go away, and they got curious. Trent even started laughing and fooling around, saying they'd found a dinosaur. He grabbed the bone, ran around the field, and shouted, "Here comes the dinosaur! We found the dinosaur!" For a short, incredible moment, they let themselves believe they had found something from the time of giants. Well, it wasn't a dinosaur, but if it wasn't that, then what was it? Not long after the men started yelling with excitement, James's little grandson heard all the noise and came running down to the field to see what was going on. What happened next would stay in James's memory forever. When my 5-year-old grandson saw the hip bone, he just stopped moving. James remembered, his voice gentle with feeling. His mouth dropped open, and he couldn't look away. He was totally amazed. Seeing that little boy standing there speechless in front of this old mystery somehow made the moment even more special. The men still didn't know exactly what they'd found, but they were sure it was something important. At the time, they thought the rib bone was probably the only one buried there, but they were going to get a big shock. There were many more bones still hidden underground, way more. Since they couldn't figure it out on their own, James and Trent decided to call the bone experts at the University of Michigan. They knew this was bigger than anything they could deal with, and they were right. Soon, a team of experts came to the field to check it out. Dan Fisher, a professor who studies old bones and runs the university's bone museum, came with the team. The moment they saw the rib, something changed in how they looked. Their eyes got wide, they stopped talking. But instead of telling what they knew, the scientists just stood there in strange silence, staring at the bone like they'd seen a ghost from long ago. James and Trent looked at each other nervously, confusion showing on their faces. Minutes felt like hours. The tension was choking. They didn't say anything, and I thought they were just trying to figure out how it got in my field, James said, his voice showing his growing worry. The scientists talked quietly to each other, pointing at marks on the bone that only they understood. Finally, after what felt like forever, Dan slowly looked up from the bone. His face was white, his voice almost a whisper. I think I know what this might be," he said, his hand shaking a little. "But if I'm right, there should be more. Much more." He stopped, swallowing hard. "We need to dig deeper. We need to know for sure." "I told Dan they could dig, but I was honestly scared they might be wrong," James said later. "But I was even more scared they might be right." The team started right away. They had just one day to find as much as they could before James needed to get back to his drain work and finish gathering his crops. Time was running out, and the pressure was heavy. 15 people from the university rolled up their sleeves and got to work in the muddy field. They also brought in local help, a digger operator named James Bollinger. No one knew what they might find, and that made the whole thing feel like an adventure. As they worked, the crew came up with all kinds of ideas about what the bones might be or what might happen to them. But one big question kept bothering them. How did these bones end up on James's farm anyway? Word started to spread fast through the small farming town. Curious neighbors started gathering at the edge of the field, their faces full of wonder and disbelief. Kids pointed in amazement. Grown-ups whispered theories, and older people shared stories of strange things they'd found in their own fields years ago. The discovery was becoming what everyone in the area was talking about. The answer would soon shock them all. Then, in the middle of their desperate digging, the ground gave up its biggest secret. One of the workers suddenly let out a scary scream that rang across the field. "Stop! Everyone stop!" Time seemed to stop. Every shovel stopped moving. Everyone held their breath. The worker stood perfectly still, staring down into the hole, his face completely white. Slowly, with a shaking finger, he pointed at something huge coming out of the old mud. A tusk. Not just any tusk. A huge, curved ivory spear that seemed to go on forever into the darkness below. The silence was overwhelming. Then, like a wall breaking, chaos broke out. "My God," Dan whispered, falling to his knees beside the dig. "My God, it's really here." That moment changed everything forever. Now they all knew for sure there were more bones down there. Dan Fisher had been right from the start, and the truth was more amazing than anyone had dared to think. With new excitement mixed with fear, the whole team worked faster. Working from sunrise to sunset without stopping to eat or drink, they rushed against time. The importance of history pressed down on them with every shovel of dirt. James watched in shocked silence as his simple drain project turned into an archaeological miracle. Finally, Dan could no longer keep the world-changing news to himself. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. He moved slowly toward James, each step weighed down by the heaviness of old mysteries. When they discovered the tusk, James recalled, Dan stared at me with wet eyes and spoke the words that would transform everything. "James, these bones, they come from a woolly mammoth." Those words stayed in the air like a crash of thunder. A mammoth. Right there in his farmland. An animal from the beginning of time, resting under his soybean crops for more than 15,000 years. But Dan had even more startling information to tell. Discoveries that would make them shiver with fear. His voice became a scary whisper. "This isn't just a regular mammoth," he said, his words heavy with old mysteries. "This looks like a Jeffersonian mammoth, an unusual mix of woolly mammoth and Columbian mammoth, named for Thomas Jefferson." He stopped, letting the huge importance settle in. "This creature was a giant among other giants," Dan went on, his voice full of wonder and fear. "A grown male around 40 years old, reaching 10 feet high at his shoulders and weighing 9 tons. A real beast from the Ice Age." But the most frightening discovery was still coming. Dan also told them he hoped James might think about giving the find to the University of Michigan for study. The mammoth had been alive between 11,700 and 15,000 years ago, maybe more than 1,000 years before the well-known Clovis hunters showed up. He also thought that old hunters might have killed it. There was even a scratch on the rib that looked like it had been carved up for eating. "We have great proof of human activity right here," Dan announced, his voice shaking with excitement. But then the men asked each other, if hunters killed it, why didn't they eat it? Why bury it instead of selling it or using it? None of them knew the answer yet, but they planned to figure it out. That's when Dan said that old hunters might have put the mammoth in a pond to keep the meat good, an early method to save food. "They might have cut up the body and stored pieces of it at the bottom of a pond," he said, pointing to the big rocks. "These stones might have been used to hold their meat stash under the water." At the same time, the digging went on. The team kept working hard, hoping to discover more parts of the mystery. After many hours of digging through the soybean field, they finally found something really incredible. Along with the hip bone, they discovered a skull with 2 huge tusks, ribs, part of the spine, and both shoulder bones. But that wasn't everything. Spread around the mammoth bones, they found 3 strange boulders, one as big as a medicine ball, one like a basketball, and another shaped like a football. There was no creek or natural way these rocks could have ended up here, Dan said, his voice full of excitement. Close to one of the tusks, they also found a small stone chip that looked like it might have been used as a cutting tool. It was an amazing sight. Using ropes attached to the digging machine, the team carefully lifted the mammoth's huge skull and tusks from the muddy hole as the sun went down. Dan said it was one of the top 10 most important discoveries ever made in Michigan. Even though they had found only about 20% of the skeleton, it was still in great shape. The only big parts missing were the back legs, feet, and a few smaller bones. And the fact that they could recover so much of it in one piece meant scientists might learn more from this discovery than from any other mammoth bones they'd studied before. Even though it looked like a woolly mammoth, Dan said that the animal might not have really been woolly. Based on what he saw, he thought it might be a Jeffersonian mammoth, a rare kind believed to be a cross between woolly and Columbian mammoths. These types have features from both kinds. No matter what type it was, one thing was certain. This was a rare and amazing discovery that could change the story of human presence in North America. "If this proof is confirmed," Dan said seriously, "it would be the earliest example of humans interacting with a mammoth in the eastern Great Lakes area." News about the mammoth spread fast around the neighborhood. Curious neighbors and visitors began coming to James's farm to see the bones themselves. "We've had people drive here from Battle Creek and Jackson," James said in an interview. "They come to Chelsea, stop somewhere to ask for directions, and then drive straight here." He continued, "We've had teachers, kids, parents, and even grandparents visit. Just this morning, we had a man in hospice come by to see the bones. The response has been incredible." So, what became of the mammoth skeleton in the end? James chose to give it to the University of Michigan. The scientists came back in 2017 for a second dig, finding 40 more bones and pieces that had been missed in the hurried first dig. "We got the kind of information we need to do the science correctly," Dan said happily. The bones now sit in the University of Michigan Museum of Natural History, where people from all over the world can come to admire this incredible discovery. But the story didn't stop there. The discovery had affected lives in ways no one could have expected. Nicole Lorca was a college student studying German and evolutionary anthropology when she first learned about the bristle mammoth on the evening news. "I heard about it and thought, that is so cool. I would love to be part of that," she remembered, her eyes bright with excitement. That single news story changed the direction of her whole life. She added paleontology as a minor, graduated, and went to work in Fisher's lab, spending many hours carefully fixing the very skull and tusks that had come from James's field. "The first bristle dig is what made me want to get into paleontology," she said, "and now I'm here." Still, for James Bristle, the mystery has never really ended. Even today, years after that important September morning, he walks his fields with a changed view. "A mammoth in my soybeans is the discovery of our lifetimes," he said, his voice carrying both pride and haunting wonder. "But even now, when I'm driving or walking across the field, I can't help but think, what else is down there?" And perhaps most mysteriously of all, almost 10 years have gone by since that earth-shaking discovery. The evidence seems strong, the scientific study complete, yet the full results of this possibly history-changing find stay locked away, unpublished in scientific journals. The question that bothers the scientific community echoes through university halls. Why? What secrets does the bristle mammoth still keep? But there's another part to this story that shows something deeper about human behavior. In a world where such discoveries could have made James a rich man, he picked a different way. No wealth waited for him, no fancy awards decorated his home, no government honors carried his name. The bones that could have sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars on the private market were freely given to science. His only real reward? The mammoth now carries his name forever, the Bristle Mammoth, shown in the University of Michigan's Museum of Natural History, where thousands of visitors admire his kindness as much as the ancient creature itself. He renamed his farm Mammoth Acres, a simple monument to the day everything changed. The viral video of the skull being lifted from the earth has been watched almost 1 million times, making James accidentally famous around the world. Yet, when asked about recognition, his voice has no anger, only amazement. "A mammoth in my soybeans is the discovery of our lifetimes," he thinks, watching visitors still come to his farm years later, drawn by the magic of that September morning. Perhaps the greatest prize isn't money or fame, but knowing that your moment of curiosity changed our understanding of the ancient world forever. And what other ancient mysteries might still be sleeping under our feet, waiting for the right moment to appear? Did you like this story? Imagine finding something in your backyard worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Would you keep it and cash in, or would you give it away like James did? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Wishing you a wonderful day.